Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the delegate, does he oppose the Commonwealth being involved in a market-based approach called cap and trade as involves carbon emissions?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say the gentleman, in my personal view, is really not relevant. The point is, should the House of Delegates and the Senate have a role in the policy, and I would have a role as an elected official representing my district.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I want to take you back 30 years. Living in Southern California, none of us were living there 30 years ago, but a lot of people were. Or if you were living in a major metropolitan area, New York City, Washington, D.C. And for those of us who remember that time, you will remember that a lot of the air was very fouled. There was a lot of SO2, nitrous oxide, in the air generated by power plants. And it was a time when the environmental movement was really getting going. And there were a lot of requests being made by environmentalists to clean it up. And their original solution was one that had a lot of people upset. It involved putting scrubbers on all these smokestacks of all these power plants. And naturally, people who were running these power plants were very concerned because this was very expensive equipment. And everyone was going to have to put the scrubbers on, whether you had a relatively clean plant or a relatively dirty plant. And they tried and tried and tried, and they could never get that resolution passed. So they came up with an idea that was generated by an attorney, a Republican attorney, in the first Bush administration, an idea that was based on market principles, an idea that came to be known as cap and trade. And under the principle, you might remember, you would let the market work. And you will let those people who generated the most pollution essentially buy credits from those people who are generating the least pollution. So that those people who wanted to generate lower amounts of pollution, they would invest, and then they would recapture their costs by trading their lower emissions against the higher emissions of the other people. That bill passed. And it passed because people thought, well, we let the market work, and we let people pay for what's called, in the economist terminology, externalities, the cost of treating people for bronchitis, asthma, etc., the cost of cleaning up the air. The scheme worked masterfully. And when you add to the catalytic converters that were put on a lot of vehicles around the country, you cleaned up a lot of the air as it involves SO2 and nitrous oxide. So fast forward to recent years, and states now are trying to think up ways that they can deal with carbon emissions. Because I think most people recognize that carbon emissions are a big problem in terms of the climate. So they came up with a concept called RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Emissions Initiative, that applied to a number of states, primarily in the Northeast. And they put in a regimen whereby emissions would be capped and traded. You set a cap, you trade under the cap or above the cap, and people who are generating the most emissions, they pay, and those who are generating the least emissions, they get a benefit. What happened? Well, in these states, between the 10 years since RGGI was in place, emissions fell by 50%. But not only that, but states were raising money too, because they were doing the auctions. And they would raise money to the tune of billions of dollars that they would then invest in environmental protection. So let's fast forward a couple years and think about it if we were to join RGGI. Not only would we have a regimen that would cause emissions to decline, but we would have millions of dollars that could be spent on farms throughout the Commonwealth for best management practices that so many of us in this room hear about from our rural communities. Now, wouldn't that be a thing to behold? And what you're doing with this bill is making it very difficult for us to engage and enter that compact that will make a difference for the Commonwealth of Virginia and make a difference for our citizens. I hope that you will vote no on this bill.